Kalispera, Anthropos. Welcome everybody to Oeconomica, all about economics and finance. Welcome, and in my readings of macroeconometric papers, I just came across a very recent Bank of England S structural VAR, because lately we were talking about VARs. Structural VAR, where the staff at the Bank of England, the researchers, the economists and researchers at the Bank of England, they put together a global model, and they injected some shocks so that to make a sense of the impulse response function. So these charts, to make it simple, they inject this world demand shock, world supply shock, world energy shock. And I found something very interesting, is that, for example, we see here how the world energy shock, when accounting for the bank rate, we see that there is the line, the response function, it's flat. So there is no that reflects more or less the behavior or the idea, the theoretical idea of the central bank not to react to an energy shock, but to wait, so to see the pass-through effect of the energy shock. That's why I always thought that the Taylor rule needs a conditional volatility parameter, a sigma parameter, when we are assessing the inflation gap output, because this response, these charts, it tells us that there is no ability of the bank in monetary policy to foresee the shock coming. It's not the problem of the response function. It's without a volatility parameter in assessing the level of bank rate, we don't see the volatility coming up in inflation. But we have some fixed parameter which are estimated with the DSG model, which is our phi of pi. Okay, it's a fixed parameter. Calibrate the DSG model and so forth and so on. My own humble idea is to try and find how to incorporate a sigma parameter for the inflation gap, so that it's more in real-time adjustment to how inflation is becoming more or less volatile, and so to foresee the any sort of price shock just a little bit having some sort of idea a bit before the shock propagates through the economy. Then another thing which is very truly interesting is to see, compare and contrast here. Okay, so those charts, to be clear, these are modeled on world energy shock, what is the bank rate reaction. It's on a global scale. Now, what they did at the Bank of England, and then they have the forecasted variance error, all the features of the VAR models. The VAR models, as I tried to say, I'm not a professor, but they are multivariate models. So we want to assess the interaction, or the interdependence, the interpolation, the inference of many macroeconomic variables, and we want to know if in an equation, if we have inflation going up, what is the response of GDP, or if GDP is going up, it's increasing, it's growing, what is the response of inflation? These models, they are useful because they are even more useful when, as the Bank of England does, the staff at the Bank of England, which are way more knowledgeable than me, they impose or inject into the equation, into the models, which are all covariance matrices, some shocks, so that you can prepare your knowledge and your monetary policy or your fiscal policy to any possible shock. It's a bit of like running a stress test on the banking sector. You run a stress test on the macroeconomic framework, and so you have some statistically feasible results. Now, here we see something very interesting. We have the same model with UK, you can see here, UK demand, UK supply, UK monetary policy shock. Now, if you see here, this is very, very interesting, okay? If we have a demand shock on what is the response of real GDP? It's flat at 0.2. Okay, while instead, if we have a supply shock, which in this term it has to be interpreted as a positive supply shock, what does real GDP? It goes the impulse response function. You have a real GDP grows, but 0.2 approaching 0.3, almost 0.4. So you see that the line of the impulse response function it steps up a little bit, although it's a curve. It's not a step function, but it's a curve. So what that means in an empirical terms, that supply, aggregate supply, in macroeconomic terms, is the real economic factor, together with total factor productivity, that improves the speed limit of economic growth. It's not demand. Okay, so that's why in other content that I blabbered about the UK economy is that it's the wrong approach to target aggregate demand in order to make sure that inflation it does not deviate from 2%, or if you are the Labour government, they target aggregate demand, so in order to achieve with the Bank of England the 2% inflation target. That is the wrong approach, because targeting aggregate demand nevertheless it makes sure that then you have unemployment that it's rising. And so another way of targeting aggregate demand is to tax employment. So you are in a sense constraining supply, so you are imposing a negative aggregate supply shock, and with that you are targeting aggregate demand, because there is less people, there are less workers which have disposable income, because more people they are unemployed. So the Bank of England material, of course, is the utmost quality, and I was fascinated to see how this supply shock, although it's a very small, minimal thing to see, but it explains how a positive supply shock into the economy is the real aggregate expansionary macroeconomic factor that can expand the capacity utilization, or the total factor productivity in a socio-economic construct. So a demand shock, it's having the same or higher level of aggregate demand vis-a-vis the same level of aggregate supply. So it's what it's defined, not defined, but normally you see it's a high sugar rush. So it's a short-term aggregate demand, because probably there are more savings. For many other factors, you can have a short-term boost in demand, but structurally the supply of the economy is always at the same level. And so you see how it's quite flat, while the response in real GDP, when it's aggregate supply, it improves a little bit more. So that's what I was fascinated with. So it's it's truly interesting. And all these charts, they are all the forecast error variance decomposition. So you see any color, it's the percentage by which you have a error variance decomposition. So what is the error variance of world demand, world supply? Because the forecast, you have to account also for a margin of error. So in percentages, what is the component that adds to the forecast error variance? And you see every color, it's associated with a different macroeconomic variable. So I will go and keep reading on this stuff. However, it's definitely, it's important to read these papers, because you can have you can gain a lot of knowledge, but you can find evidence when you have some ideas and say, okay, probably I'm not wandering in the dark, but there is some some credible research that proves that it's actually the expansion of aggregate supply that improves the speed limit or the potential GDP level, and not aggregate demand. So managing aggregate demand, it does not work in our macroeconomic environment, which is with global supply chain. We have open economies, we have interdependencies, where it's supply chain, investments, basic goods and services, like not to mention, I don't know, the tomatoes that go in and out from the UK. They are grown in Spain or in Portugal, or I don't know, in North Africa, or stuff like that, or they come from South America. So there's no way, there is no place in the world which is an isolated socioeconomic system, unless you live in the Amazon and you never known of any other form of life outside the Amazon forest. So it's the expansion of supply that can definitely upgrade the speed limit of the economy. If I have a potential GDP which is 1.25, 1.5, and I want to bring it back up to 2%, I need to expand supply. So I need to put at work the spare capacity that I have into the economy, and attach to that something which improves the total factor productivity, which can be the technology component. And that doesn't mean that if you have a short run week course of basic AI literacy, that will help total factor productivity. It's a cultural initiative, but probably it would be way better to also for me to start with basic English grammar and the basic stuff. Yes, I'll see you. You will see more of my content. Subscribe to the channel, to Economica, and I will update my work with the codes. Of course, I took the paper, the Bank of England, and it's turned out in a var code, and I'm just running the I don't know, the first edition of the code that I put together. So I will come up with some more content, and I'm studying to make a very truly funny episode about what is VAR and linear algebra. So stay with me, and see you soon.